I think that showing that you're able to respect other people and other people's opinions is fundamental for being part of a group. And if you show by your demeanor that you do not do that, the members of that group will want to marginalize you because you don't respect them. Why should they respect you back?
Yeah, well, it's a very easy to understand thing, isn't it? It's that they're trying to use their rights to remove yours.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to respect that person's rights in turn.
Exactly. So,
and I quite like it as well because it's not necessarily making high-minded appeals to morality necessarily, although I do think it's a moral thing ultimately. It's just a practical understanding of how things work. If you want to have an open society, to use that term, of course, it is worth mentioning as well that George Soros named his Open Society Foundation after Karl Popper's book. That isn't a reason to dismiss Popper's ideas. I don't think he had any choice over that. And I also think that the ideas of George Soros and Karl Popper are very different, kind of opposed to one another. So that caveat is worth mentioning. But I think that when it comes to these sorts of things, and I think that this is something that in our previous two contemplations, some people might have misunderstood. When we were talking about engaging in debate and being civil and not lowering yourself, that didn't necessarily mean that you have to tolerate the intolerant, one might say.
Yeah.
I think that if someone shows an unwillingness to engage properly in politics and they're repeatedly doing so, and the sort of progressive left types, right? The ones that will shout you down, don't care about your rights, will crush you if they get in power. They really, really just see you as an enemy to be squashed like an insect. I don't care about those people whatsoever when it comes to their engagement in politics. I don't mind if they're driven from civil society and they're forced to live as hermits. That's what they deserve at the very least.
And it's not just the far leftists who do this. It's also those who have actually understood Schmitt.
Yes.
And put forward his ideas, not those who just mentioned him, who would say that for him, politics is violence on street level. It's just eradicating the enemy. And he would say, for instance, that classical liberalism is an English suit that people try to fit to Germans. That was what he was saying. So I'm sure that this kind of rhetoric does not help. And I can definitely understand why people who see that as a threat, they don't see why they should go down this way.
Well, Schmitt's theory could be interpreted in a sort of civil society sense, in that you don't necessarily have to resort to violence, but he himself was a sort of apologist for the Nazi violence of his time. So I think it's fair to say that he wasn't opposed to it, and in fact, he did write in favour of it a lot of the time. So that's worth bearing in mind. You don't necessarily, and a lot of the people that refer to him might not necessarily be, advocating for political violence, because the ideas can be rehabilitated in
he definitely did not believe in public discussion and public disagreement. He thought that that this is basically a waste of time, and this involves the demilitarization of virtue and things like that. And he had the idea that societies that do accommodate public discussion, they become incredibly weak. Now, you just have to ask who won the World War I, who won World War II, who won the Cold War, and there you get your answer.
Yeah, well, it's the countries that have their free discussion, isn't it? It's, America in particular, I think, is the standout one there, which has the strongest defense of free speech of any Western country, I would say.
You could also say that someone who would respond to me that World War II was won by the Allies, and some of them were not particularly in favor of public discussion. Not at all, in fact. But then there was the Cold War. Everyone was constantly claiming of how weak Western men are. and how weak Western societies are. But
a lot of it's just posturing at the end of the day. When people
they
talk
faced
about
consequences.
When people talk about weakness when it comes to political beliefs, it's all sort of rhetoric, isn't it? It's just like, oh right, so you're some weird.
It's political grooming.
Some weird sort of vegan adjacent academic where you're all scrawny. I think of them like Palpatine. They're just trying to encourage other people to do, violent things because it makes them feel good about themselves or what have you. And they're all feeble and pathetic.
And I must add that I'm a big believer in reason and progress. Of course, these are symbolic concepts. That
progress, not in the progressive sense.
Of course not. And let me just say why the progressivists are not in favor of progress. Throughout the whole Western tradition, you have people claiming from the very ancient times that there is a noble aspect or dimension of the soul. Call it an aspect, a part, whatever. There is something noble within us, and there is something that is less noble, more animalistic.
I mean, I would characterize it rather than mind-body dualism to just your conscious and unconscious mind. Your unconscious mind is the more animalistic part of you.
It does not have to be dualistic because it doesn't involve the claim that there are two distinct substances.
Of course, and I have actually recently found out that there are some Christians that don't believe in mind-body dualism, that you are your soul and it's an inextricable part of your body, and that perhaps it's just a translation thing in the biblical texts that have led people to believe that there's this separation. Because what we know of human psychology and biology seems to indicate that there is no space for a soul.
So let's just have this discussion another time, but let me just give you an example.
I can't resist.
An example, Aristotle is not a mind-body dualist in the way that Descartes was, but he does believe in this idea that there is a part of our soul or nature that is more noble. So what I wanted to say is that traditionally, that noble aspect has been identified with reason. It's the rational part that tries to impose an order to the disorganized and unruly non-rational part. That's one of the major things. So we are progressing when we become more rational. And by more rational, I mean when we are acting according to reason, not our animalistic nature. So the progressivists right now, they are in favor of a kind of toxic sentimentality. They are the least progressive bunch of people. They are incredibly animalistic. Why? Because they constantly want to silence rational debate. They constantly want to bombard any kind of public discussion and rational discussion on the grounds that it affects the feelings of some people.
Boo-hoo.
So reason and feelings are completely different things. That is why I think
they're at odds with one another a lot of the time, actually.
They're very much at odds with one another. Not always, but sometimes they are. But that is why I think that a lot of conservatives are a bit one-sided when they talk about sentiment and thinking. These two are different things. Of course, we want a society that has bonds of sentiment, but feelings and sentiments are not tools of cognition. That's why we need reason. So the people who flood departments right now, and also civil society, and constantly want to claim that we should restrict free speech and rational debate on the grounds that it is whatever you want phobic. They are actually in favor of society's decline. They are actually contributing to that decline in the name of progress.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.